1, 2, 3.
So hi everyone. I'm
Hi.
here with I'm here with Alo and Tonis, the brains behind the Teamscope. Guys, welcome to Skillsformars podcast. I'm very happy to have you here. I still remember the first time we met in Barcelona. It was for the HR meeting. I think it was somewhere March, April, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Spring.
Yeah, spring. We had a really good talk at that point, and I know I left home and I said, wow, I met some really cool guys, honest, authentic, about talent acquisition technology. I'm looking forward to see what they're doing. And here you are. I have you here now, so I'm very excited to talk to you about Teams.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time. I know you are very busy right now, right? You are funding the company and the platform.
And serving clients. It's both ways busy.
Both ways busy. How big is the team right now?
It's 7 people at the moment.
It's growing.
Yep.
Growing, and indeed it's a good size. So we are still small enough to be nimble and fast, but big enough to work with some very large clients. So.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So let's start by introducing yourselves and a bit about Teamscope, how you got to build Teamscope, why did you do it, and then we get into Teams later on. But just a bit to give everyone the understanding of who you are and what Teamscope is.
Okay. Shall I start, or how do you?
Yeah, please do. Yes.
So actually, I have been. I studied psychology, and then I have been nearly 30 years headhunter. And done some other things as well, but how Teamscope started, the story behind is that Alo was building a team of his own when working with this big pharmaceutical company, and asked my advice about how to hire or select people to his team. And it was, as we are like relatives, we know each other for 30 years. Alo is my nephew. So it was on a family gathering at Christmas time, and then we were sitting and having some wine and discussing, and I said, well, I don't lie to you. I lie to my clients that, well, I can find a good fit for your team, but for you, I have to say that really just trust your gut feeling. Nothing better available there in the market to assess people, and that's how it started. We kind of found both that it's very strange that Alo is building the best data analytics team in this country, and then the biggest decision he has to make, he has to just rely on his gut feeling. At the same time, when there is huge amounts of data about everyone outside there. So, and that's how we started to discuss, and after some time, Alo quit his corporate job, and after some time, then we have this product which measures people in teams and helps to select best amendments or additions to every team, and also helps to develop teams and onboard the new team members. So that's the story in brief. Alo, what would you like to amend? Yeah.
Yeah, that was it basically. It was a conversation started over Christmas dinner. When I was asking Tonis for advice regarding how to hire into my own team, how to make sure that the people I'm bringing on board work well together with everybody else around them, and that they form a high-performing team where people complement one another. But indeed, the fact that Tonis said I have to rely on my gut did not...
You didn't like it?
I didn't really like it. Yeah, I'm a data analyst or a data geek by nature, so I thought there must be a better way. So if we can rely on data to, recommend.
Did you manage to hire that team in the end? Did you use Teamscope to do it, or you did it before? And
Teamscope didn't exist that time yet.
Teamscope didn't exist. Yes, indeed. I went with Googling, what interview questions you should ask, and my HR at that corporate was not that helpful, as it happens, I guess.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes, in many organizations. So then I basically Googled it, or tried to figure out how to conduct interviews, how to evaluate people on my own. Did some bad hiring decisions and a couple of good ones. And indeed, shortly after that, Tonis and I decided that we need to figure out a better way to do that.
Yeah, it's funny how we rely on gut feeling when we hire people.
That's the typical situation. How it is done in corporate settings, even with professional people, it's really just people look at the data. The only data they look is the CV, but then they just meet the people, and then you have a kind of information overload with all the information you get about the person.
Yeah, and then in the end, it's always about, I always have the same feeling that it's about how do I feel next to this person. It's more of a gut feeling, more of an intuition rather than any data driven. But let me ask you, why teams, and why not looking at individual or job fit, right? Why are you looking at teams and not how I would be a fit for the job, but how I would be a fit for the team that I work in? Why is that more important, or how does it work?
Yes, it is actually more important because nowadays organizations, they consist of teams. Mm-hmm. Teams are the building blocks of organizations today. So everybody works in a team, and if you're very happy with the team you are in, with the closest colleagues you work with, then even you might be unhappy with the general organization or the big boss or some of the company policies or whatever, you will stay there. And that's the most important thing. So everybody works in a team, many people in several teams at the same time. Some are virtual teams, some are temporary, some are like full-time. Mm-hmm. And that's the important thing. And there is nothing else on the market which would help you to predict whether this person or the other one will fit in with the people they are working with. But there is lots of data saying that, well, if the fit is not good, then the person is leaving early.
Yeah. So team fit would be more important than job fit, or should we look at both if we talk?
No, both would be okay. Both would be important. Job fit, you mean like qualifications and experience and things like that? I understand. Yes, that's what you mean by job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's if we think of people who happen to be on the short list. Like if the hiring manager will talk like with 5 candidates, so there is no one without the necessary qualifications. So they will have the degree, they will have the experience. Yes, worked in the field and so on. But who is the best from these 5? That's the question. That's the very important question.
Maybe a useful comment to add would be that the person or the part of the organization where we focus mainly on is more senior, more higher level or more complicated roles. Mm-hmm. And also we try to be more helpful to the hiring manager who has to make the final decision than maybe to the HR team that does pre-screening or the first round of interviews. So
more helpful in the final decision rather than the first stages of the recruitment process.
Indeed, the first stages normally are conducted based on qualification, experience, availability, other kind of characteristics that are maybe a bit easier to measure and easier to evaluate. So we did not see that part of the funnel is the biggest problem. Where things quite often get derailed is when the kind of team leader or the hiring manager takes over from the headhunter or the HR department. Assumably, HR departments are more professional at running interviews and running the process than a team leader who is a professional at something else. They do hiring once or twice a year and don't really know how to do it properly. So that's the part where things quite often get derailed and where we have to add the most value.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe it's time to tell everyone how Teamscope is actually working. What is the platform doing? How did you build it? What are you assessing for?
Mm-hmm. To say very briefly, it works like this, that you go to our platform, you answer a couple of questions, it takes about 10-15 minutes. And then the algorithm which is behind there takes about 100 data points from you and correlates these data points with all the other members of the team and visualizes the result at the same moment. And you will see on the screen your strengths and weaknesses of your team, your personality of the team members and the values and how they match together. Also combined with some suggestions, what it should be, you should be looking for if you want to find another team member. And then when you have candidates, you can just invite them to the same. and then the tool shows you what happens if you take this candidate or the other one. What happens to the team, how it increases or changes the team agility or team cohesiveness or things like that.
So what are you looking for exactly in those 10-15 minutes that I take the assessment? What are you looking for?
It's generally personality traits and general human values. Mm-hmm. So we base our algorithms based on the scientific knowledge which is out there about teams. And to summarize it very briefly, it says that, well, the more similar people are in their values, the better they feel together. They want to be with each other. They are comfortable with each other. They trust each other. And the more different they are in everything else, the more agile, productive, effective they are. So what we are looking for is similarity in values and diversity in personality traits. Mm-hmm. And we measure these two things, values and personality, with the well-known, well-proven, very valid and reliable methods which are out there, worked out and tested millions of times.
And this is one of the discussions we had together in Barcelona, because I really like the tools you are using, because they are really validated.
Yeah, they are very, very valid, and each of the scale is proven with hundreds of thousands of people and research. And the algorithm, of course, what we have built together is original, but it just combines all the knowledge together. So if you would even know all the 200 or something research papers which are behind our algorithm, you wouldn't be able to put this into your decision making when you are face to face with another human being. It's just not possible.
It's not possible.
So algorithm does it.
How Teamscope works and what kind of research you are looking in, and actually this is one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you, because I always have the feeling, and I've been working in talent acquisition for the past 17 years, that we always somehow do not have the right time to check on science, to check on research, right? It's too much information out there. I think it's information overload plus the kind of companies we work for, they're all lean, right? So you don't have the right amount of time to go and do the research. So most of the time what we do is we work on best practices, on what we have seen others do. And my worry is that we don't know if it would work for us or not. Right? Maybe it works for you, but we're not in the same context, and it's always, would it work or not? It's a trial and fail, but I feel that the price is too high to pay, and we don't know what to rely on. So, would you indulge me to discuss a bit about science, the science behind the Teamscope, and how you look at? So the first thing I would ask is, right? You look at values, personality, and competencies as well. As I remember from the application. So how do all of this relate to teamwork? Why are they so important to teamwork? How do they mix and match so they can give us an indication if someone would be a fit for a team or not?
Okay. Just very briefly, I said that there is this knowledge about high-performing teams. And I think we have read everything, all the real scientific research, what is out there, we are familiar with, and it's somehow reflected in the algorithm. And it takes about 5,000 to 10,000 data points per team, and then combines them to visualize and make it easily accessible, this information. And in a more broader sense, I think what it helps to do is to slow down or bring the data in and make slow decisions. So the bad thing is if the decisions are made like quickly, and like the life says and research says, it's like usually the decision is made in 2 minutes, which should be taken like maybe made in days. But people don't know how to spend these days, and even if they know all the data, what we have put into this algorithm, they don't know how to use it. So, and the main, like the rule of thumb is that the more similar people are with their values, the more they feel comfortable together, they trust each other better, and the more different they are in everything else, then they are more productive, effective, agile, and creative, so to say. And how we measure this is like everybody's 100 data points are correlated with each other. So we are not saying that, well, somebody is like an innovator or somebody is an executor, but it just depends what the other people are, what kind of people are there in the team. And it doesn't mean that you and me, like a types, are interacting, but we are interacting on each of our qualities. And that means that mine or your individual unique role or unique contribution in a team is different depending on what are the different teams we are working into. So what it means is also that if we take one person and try to fit this person into one team, then the data or the question marks or questions to ask, what our algorithm prompts, would be much different if the team is different.
I guess taking a step back from there to explain how why we decided to go with these specific three frameworks for measuring people, and why we found them to be most relevant is that, first of all, when analyzing what kind of assessment methods are out there, how reliable they are, what they can predict, and how they're normally used in practice, what we realized was that normally the problem is not the accuracy or reliability or robustness of different assessment methods or the tools that are commonly used in the recruitment process. So personality assessment tools have been reliable and robust for already 50 years, or maybe 30, maybe 40, but close to that. We have had a very good framework for understanding people's intrinsic values and motivation for roughly the same time, roughly 30 years at least. And we have around 40 years of very solid academic science describing the competencies that help to differentiate high performers at different senior level roles. So the science has been out there for a long time already, but as you said, the problem normally is information overload and how to then combine all of that huge amount of data that you should be able to process in a hiring situation, and how to make sense of that data. And I think the biggest contribution our platform has made so far is making that complex web of data easily understandable and easily usable by also the average or the everyday hiring manager, and not only by very experienced assessment or HR professionals as you would need to have in most of the assessment tools or analysis tools that have been commonly used. So more specifically, the frameworks that we use help to analyze three different concepts or constructs about the person and the team. Then looking at values helps us understand what really drives a person, what really motivates them, how they make really important decisions in life if they have time to think about them. So how does a person make conscious decisions, and what these conscious decisions are based on, which in a team setting helps to very well predict their engagement, happiness, retention rates in a team, because obviously in order to function as a team, you need a foundation or a common groundwork to base your teamwork on, and shared values or a set of shared values is the best way to do that. Personality, on the other hand, helps to understand how a person reacts to a given situation, what kind of tasks and interactions they feel most comfortable with, how they approach different problems. So basically, if values answer a question of what a person wants to achieve, then personality better answers a question how they go about doing that, how they normally interact with others. And then finally, the layer of competencies on top of that helps to answer the question of what is the specific job or a skill or a broad level competency that the person then brings to that specific team and can apply to solve a particular task or excel at a particular role. So three questions and three kind of layers of the onion that we need to understand about the person in order to get a complete picture of the person behind the resume.
And so if a hiring manager looks at the data, or HR, or whoever looks at the data, even the individual, how would they know that they are a match for a team or not? Tony said in brief that the more values are close to each other, then the better the team fit. And the more you are diverse in personality or competencies, again, the more you can bring to the team, so you can make it more agile and more dynamic. But if someone looks at the data, and because the data is not always so clear, right? They can fall in the middle, or it's maybe they are very close as values, but they're also close as skills and personalities, competencies and personality. So how would someone make a decision based on this? What would be a good or if there is a good formula?
Yes, we don't. I think it's a very important differentiator between us and many other tools. Again, is that we don't try to provide only a formula. We can, a statistically significant formula for predicting success at a higher rate than average, but that's not the goal. That's not the main benefit that we're able to offer. What we do is that we visualize the data in an easily understandable manner. We provide the data in a format to the user where they can draw their own conclusions based on that data, and we structure it so that the person would be kind of nudged or forced to go through this structured thinking process by looking at the data and then drawing their own conclusions regarding what are the characteristics that they really need to analyze in a candidate, how they should analyze those characteristics, and how those characteristics will then influence their team as a whole. So we don't aim to provide a formula or take the person out of the decision-making process, but we help the person be more structured and objective in how they think and how they structure their own decision-making process.
Okay, so if I still stay a bit with values and personality, is any of them more important? Would any of them influence performance more than others, or they are equally important? And I didn't do the research, so I'm.
That's the thing, that all of those characteristics influence a different aspect of performance. So that if you really want to build a cohesive team where people have a strong amount of, a lot of trust towards one another, where people are likely to stay for a very long time, where it is likely that the team is very good at going through difficulties and challenges, then you would want to align them in their core values. Now, what the specific core values are that you want to have in your team depends on your organization, your business, the environment that you're working in, but at least for a team to function as a team, you should have a similar framework for making decisions and similar goals that they move towards. Obviously, it's better if those goals then are intrinsically motivating to all the team members, which means analyzing or understanding the values of each individual team member makes sense and is a very helpful thing to know as a team leader. Now, when it comes to personalities and then how these different aspects of personality and especially those aggregated dimensions like the minimums, maximums, standard deviations of a certain characteristic, how they manifest in different aspects of team performance is indeed a much more complicated science. Fortunately, a lot of it is already known, so we can predict, for example, that in order to have very lively discussions, you will probably want to have a high standard deviation of extroversion in a team. In order to build a very creative team where people get a lot of new ideas, you want to avoid having too pragmatic people on the team. So not the average, but you need to kind of cut off the people who are maybe a bit too stuck in their way of thinking. So the minimum level of something is important. When it comes to conscientiousness, for example, then you want to avoid, probably in most teams, having a very high diversity in that specific personality characteristic, because a very high diversity in conscientiousness has been related to, or has found to be related to, a high risk of social loafing, a high risk of your high performance getting disengaged if people are not able to follow or don't contribute enough. So yeah, to summarize, that's where things get really messy.
Okay.
But may I add something just to not to make it sound too complicated? It's actually, you don't need to know all these details what Alo just described about the research. If you have if you use the tool, you just have different candidates, and you will see what happens. It's like visualized. You will see what happens if I am doing the search, and there is two candidates, Alo and Julia, and I will just. It's very easy to compare them. So I can see on the screen what happens if I take Julia, or what happens if I take Alo, or what happens with the team. What is Alo bringing to this team, or what Julia is bringing. And for hiring manager, it's really easy without any psychology preparation or without any prior knowledge about the research, all these hundreds of thousands of pages of research, to select and see what happens if I take one candidate or the other one. And it makes really the decision making easy, but not quick in this bad sense, but it's still a database decision what you have. There is lots of data behind, but it's easy for you to use the data and make the decision.
Yeah, and I think it's extremely important that you are helping non-professionals, non-psychologists make this kind of decisions without knowing the research.
Yeah.
I also feel it's highly important that they understand that there is some science behind, and there is research behind, and we just didn't wake up with this kind of how do we fit teams together. Let me ask you something else. I was thinking, of course, before we had the chat, and I was thinking what else could influence teams and make them work together. And I was thinking of trust. And I'm not sure if trust is one of the things that you are looking at. I was also thinking about the actual knowledge of the job, not the soft skills, but the actual knowledge of the job. And maybe even there are people who prefer certain kind of roles versus others, like leading or not leading, planning or not planning, right? So they prefer certain kind of roles. Do you look at this as well? Or would it be there in the future, or how, or it's not as important as the three that you are looking at?
So there were three questions, and I forgot the first one by the time we got to the third.
Trust.
Sorry.
Trust was the first.
Trust. Okay.
Trust.
Yes.
I was thinking about trust, role preference, and the actual knowledge of the job.
Indeed. So trust is indeed a very important aspect that we do incorporate, but we actually measure that as an outcome or an output variable that we then measure in order to look for correlations between the input data point, which are values, personality, and the combination of those, and then how those aspects are able to predict the levels of trust inside the team, and specifically how much a specific individual inside a specific team feels they are able to trust their peers. And again, the moderator there has been found to be similarity in core values, or at least a very strong part of the effect comes from there. So it is extremely important, but we see it mainly as an outcome of something else, or as a result, not as an input that can kind of is there when the team first gets together. The skills obviously matters a lot. We take a more broad approach. We don't look at technical skills or very job specific skills, but we do look at competencies. So that's the third layer of our frameworks. And there, indeed, the competency, matching the core competencies of individuals with their goals, their role, the business results, or the business goals of the organization is extremely critical. That's a very strong value that our clients actually get from the tool, is being able to understand the critical competencies that are needed in order to achieve their objectives, and also understand the potential gaps between the existing competencies of the team and what they actually need in order to achieve their goals. Is a very straightforward and easily understandable result of the assessment process. And finally, the role profiles. We do that to some degree by working with a couple of clients of ours who, for example, want to profile high performers at specific types of jobs in specific types of organizations, and they want to understand the characteristics that probably help these people succeed in those roles. It's especially critical when the job is not easily defined, or it's not something that you find in a textbook or can define based on 20 years of experience. So a job like a product manager at a startup, for example, is kind of a new job, and it's kind of vague what kind of competencies and behaviors are needed in order to perform well at that job. So this is a role where we analyzed high performers at those specific types of organizations in that specific job to understand what are the characteristics that help people succeed or differentiate those high performers from everybody else. So this type of insight sometimes is really helpful, but we try to steer away from putting people in boxes or roles, because obviously that's kind of a huge oversimplification of a person, and like huge mistakes in that type of categorization are inevitable. So
this is what I liked when we discussed in Barcelona, that you don't try to put people in boxes, which I really liked. So giving data is different than giving a score, right? And then people can make their own decisions. Other teams can make their own decisions. Oh, Tonis, we can see you in two videos.
Really? I was logged out for some reason, so I don't know how to.
No worries. Just let it run, not an issue.
Yeah.
Alo, you were talking about high performing people in various teams and working with companies to select those. How about team leaders? Do you do that as well? Through your algorithms, through your data, can you identify who would be a good team leader for the team if you're just building a team? Or did you find any characteristics of good team leaders in existing teams? Something that would point out that, hey, these people are better at leading rather than others, or
not yet. And we try not to answer questions that are a bit kind of too general, I would say. Okay. I wouldn't, obviously, if you analyze, who commonly are leaders of teams and organizations, then you will see that these are less agreeable, more extroverted, and more conscientious people. But that doesn't tell you anything. That just tells you about people who want to take on leadership roles, and in most organizations are better at achieving this specific goal. So it doesn't tell you that they are better at actually leading the team. Where we do see that this type of analysis makes sense is looking again at the context and the very specific circumstance of where the team is at in the life cycle, what type of organization is that, and so on. A very good case study that we performed comprised of successful startup teams and startup founders that we have analyzed. So we gathered the data from roughly 100 founders of successful startup companies who have already passed the most risky initial stages of the startup life cycle and already have a growing business and a significant team. And there indeed we did find very clear characteristics that differentiate those people from the rest of the population. So there is a very specific type of persona or specific characteristics that obviously help startup founders succeed in what they have to do in the initial stages. Obviously, that doesn't make them better, or probably doesn't even make them good at leading a more mature organization or a different type of team in a different type of organization.
It makes them good at that point in time.
It makes them good at that specific context, at that specific type of problem, and obviously, it's a very useful insight if you are building a startup team, but can be a completely wrong benchmark if you're building a law firm or something, completely different.
Yeah. I totally get it. But I was quite curious to understand, hey, can you differentiate leaders from the rest? Because you're working with both internal teams, right, existing teams, and teams that are being formed. So that was one of the questions that I had in my mind. And another one, I have a lot of questions for you today.
Good.
And another one is, so I've been talking to a guy called John Clark. He's the president of the Mars Society. And these are people who are preparing to go to Mars, right? He's based in Singapore, and then they go out in Utah, in the desert, or underwater, or in the Arctic, and they take 60, 80 days, 90 days to prepare to going for Mars, right? Either using the equipment or going and doing some biology studies, or all sorts of research to understand how we would behave, how we would work as teams, and so on. So because I know I'm going to have a discussion with him, I was thinking, hey, would your tool help them bring together better teams and build better teams when we are going to Mars, right? Or just for this kind of expeditions that they are doing?
It was actually a very inspiring article that I read when we first started. It was actually a Wikipedia page that described how NASA developed a data model for predicting just that, for measuring the characteristics of their astronauts, and then defining the risk factors when putting certain people together to work in a team. So indeed, yes, it was a very inspiring piece of research for me when we initially started, and now this is now manifested in a simple to use software platform as well. So yes, hopefully most teams will be using it.
If you can make an intro, we would be happy to talk to them, really.
Okay, perfect. I will talk to John and ask him, because I was thinking that then you have a difference, right, between very homogeneous teams and the heterogeneous teams, and the teams with very, very high diversity. And in their case, they would have teams with very high diversity in terms of culture, the country they come from, the languages that they speak. They all tend to speak English when they are in the team, but their native language is a different one. They come from various fields, so the knowledge is not the same. One is a geologist, one is a biologist, one is a psychologist, one is a journalist, so they can record what they are doing. So how can they think? So when you have such a diverse team, how would someone need to think about how to mix and match the people and how to make it work?
Yeah. So the key is the awareness here. Like if you imagine, like, you can in principle work with very different people, but then the more aware you are about your differences, the better you can really consider this. So and of course, you mentioned trust earlier. It's easier to trust people with whom you know that you are similar in your values and your basic approach to the world. But you can work with different people as well, but you then have to be very aware of things where your views might be different. And then the better you know, the better you can really live your real life. So for this Mars team, there are different use cases. One is to select, if they have this option open, who is the next person to add to this team, or on what teams to put these people to spend a long time out only with each other. But the other thing is, if you have already decided, then really knowing this, what kind of people we are, and what are our differences, and what our unique contributions here might be, that's helpful.
So if they don't have a tool like yours, right? Because sometimes they form them still based on the knowledge that they have, and even the availability of the people to do so. Not everyone wants to go 80 days in the Arctic and spend times in a small capsule, dressed up as an astronaut, and living without electricity for a certain amount of time, and living and eating packaged food and all of that. So I imagine they don't have the variety of choice that we have when we select for teams. What could they do to bring this awareness? So if they are there, right, they 5 or 6 people, they are sitting at the table, and they know they come from different places. Can they do anything to bring that awareness so they understand who is who and how it works? Do they have any kind of tools available if they don't have Teamscope? What can they do to figure out?
Teamscope, they would better still get Teamscope and then start using it. But if they don't have Teamscope, well, the same thing is true. Like if you talk to people, you ask each other questions, and you tell your background, and you tell about your childhood and your interests and things like that. You get to know the people better, and you kind of feel more comfortable with them. But what Teamscope does, that's the normal process would happen. Like if you go to a new team, you would in a couple of months learn something about each of the members. With Teamscope, you can do it in a couple of hours. So it's like just kind of facilitates or speeds up the normal relationship building process, which helps to build the working relationships. So Teamscope is just a tool that helps you to facilitate this.
Yeah. That's why I was asking what else can they use, but that's basically just discussing and understanding who each of them are, and then of course ideally. Yeah.
A good comment there would be that also we almost always when we start with a new client, then they ask us if it's a good idea to have that level of transparency in a team. So how Teamscope works is that the results of personality values, preferences of each team member are visible to everyone on the team. So they see the aggregated team picture, and they can drill down to each individual team member to understand about their preferences, their values, potential differences, conflict areas, and learn how to better interact with them. So almost always when we start, then clients initially are a bit cautious and ask us if it's a good idea to share that level of detail with everyone on the team. And we say always that yes, that's a necessary part of it. The whole idea behind the process is to increase awareness, first of all, among team members regarding their own team dynamics and collaboration and how they can work better together, and critically in a hiring situation to share that level of detail also with their new team member, who critically needs to understand the team dynamics, the culture, how people normally behave, what are the motivators behind the actions of each person, and what are the main differences between where I come from and where somebody else comes from. So the conversation that people have around that data, or actually looking at the data, we have a very structured guide for teams on how they should have a discussion around that. These are actually very simple questions like, how you perform best, or what types of tasks do you perform best, what type of environment do you need around yourself in order to feel good, what are the things about your surrounding and the workplace that will potentially really annoy you, what are the types of tasks that will be very annoying to you, what is the type of interaction that you would like to avoid. So very simple questions that you should ask your team members anyway, but it's without the guide or without having some sort of structure, it feels very weird or unnatural to do that. So
true. Now you made me curious. So what do individuals say about this? Because I imagine you bring a sort of reflection that they maybe don't have time to do on their own, about what they like, what they don't like, where they would be more of a fit, what would be more of a fit for them or not, what are their values, what drives them. How do you get any kind of feedback from individuals on how they perceive all of this assessment?
Tonis, do you want to take that?
They usually like it very much. It's actually what we see that like a pattern is that everybody who has a look at our product wants to try it, and everybody who tries it kind of likes it and wants to start using it. So what people say usually is that the face validity of the tool is very high. They recognize themselves in general picture. Sometimes in some small details they maybe are not, maybe don't agree with everything. But both individuals and teams say that, well, this is very reasonable what I learn here. And the team members and team leaders usually also say that, well, that gives me some understanding of some issues which I didn't understand earlier. So usually they will kind of get some answers to the questions they maybe were not even able to ask themselves earlier.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe they didn't even know how to ask themselves that.
Yeah, exactly.
Indeed.
So they would look at the picture and say, oh, now I understand. I have always had the feeling that with this team member there is something like this. So that now I understand. This is just because his personality is very different from what I am and what I am expecting. Because
there are a couple of
that with everybody, with the main issue with the conflict is that your kind of self-evident things are different. If you know what is self-evident to everybody, then you wouldn't expect it to be the same like yourself.
Yeah, it's incredible how we perceive things through our own lenses, and then we imagine the whole world is the same, or things the same.
Yeah, that's
main issue in communication, right?
Yeah. A good example about the self-reflection that you mentioned, and how people don't have time for it, or don't know how to start or go about it. Then was a conversation, or actually two conversations we had, two client meetings in a row where we had a similar situation. One was the VP of HR of a huge consulting firm of like 100,000 employees. And it was the team of his direct subordinates. So people who are more or less aware of, people issues and should be a bit more reflective maybe than I don't know, an engineering team or a finance team. But anyway, the VP of HR said that, yes, I went through the assessment with my team, and then one of my best performers, he came to me after this assessment and he said that, listen, I feel I've been in the very wrong place for years already, and I had this anxiety or tension inside. Now I understand where it comes from. I'm doing the wrong things. Well, fortunately, he did not leave, but they had a very good discussion around, what's missing and what are the things he would like to work more on, and we're able to mitigate that anxiety or the tension, actually find a way out or a new direction for that employee. But indeed, he had no idea where that came from until he had a more structured way of looking at themselves, their own motivators and what they enjoy doing as a human. And the other situation was with a consultancy. Again, people who are assessment professionals and coaches professionally, so they should be very self-aware. But after going through the assessment as a team, one of the leading consultants realized, or maybe it was the first time she was able to say this out loud, but she said that, listen, to be honest, if I didn't have to do this for money, then I would be doing something completely different. I would be living in a farm, raising chicken, working in the garden. It's completely not what I actually enjoy as a person, but this is something I'm really good at. I see that I'm helping people through that, so that's why I keep going. But again, going through this assessment helped even a team of coaches who are naturally much more self-aware and more open generally to talk about these things, helped even them to discover something very critical they were not aware of before.
And I think one of the strong things that you mentioned is that this information is actually shared among team members. Because I have cases even for internal mobility or even team building and stuff like that, where we talk about the team in general, right? What the strong skills of the team, the not so strong skills of the team, but we never look at individuals because we are afraid to share, and we are afraid that maybe the individuals will not like that we share things about them. Whereas I think, as you said, it's very interesting and very important to have this awareness and knowledge, because then we can really understand who we work with, how we behave, why we do it, what's behind, and then we can start functioning better as a team and trust each other more.
Indeed, just looking at these aggregated data points or aggregated characteristics doesn't help too often, or it can even help you draw the completely wrong conclusion. So that, for example, a very good dynamic we have in our team is that if we analyze, for example, how methodical, organized, and so on people are, then on average we are pretty okay, as a team. Then drilling down into details, we see that I am in the very far end of the scale, whereas Tonis is in the very low end of the scale. So that's something we have to be, very aware of and respect, to understand that we have completely different ways of approaching problems and, structuring our work. Looking at the average would help us draw a completely wrong conclusion looking at the details helps us understand something very significant that we need to know and be aware of.
And I think it helps people hide as well if you only look at the averages, right? Because you see the average, you see your own results, but no one else sees your own results, right? So you'd say, yeah, no one else knows that I'm actually dragging stuff behind. So you can go home, and if you are not someone prone to learn or happy to change or even show your low level of abilities, then maybe there's nothing done about it. Whereas when there is knowledge, then it's a bit tougher for you to hide as well. Maybe.
Indeed, and I wouldn't say that it's not even something that people should be. The things that we analyze are never something that people should try to hide. It's there are no good or bad types of personality. It's just personality, and there are no good or bad values.
You need to accept it and
you need to accept it and actually, even if other team members might not agree with your preference or your goal, then you would probably want them to at least be aware of it and kind of find a compromise, or understand that this is not something that you necessarily want to or would even try to change in yourself, because you can't, or why should somebody expect you to change your core values? It's not up to them.
Yeah, it's that's a bit tough as well to do.
Indeed.
Just out of a sudden. But let me ask you, this is maybe a more difficult question. Did anyone leave any team because they did the assessment and then they figured out, hey, I'm not a fit here?
Not that
maybe I'm more of a fit in the planning team or the ops team, or
not that we know of, but
okay.
We have seen actually movements that we kind of guessed or were able to predict beforehand. So, for example, after analyzing one of the largest organizations in our region and looking at a specific department there, looking at what types of people actually came in from different departments into that new business unit, then we did see a very strong similarity in values of that specific department, and at the same time a huge difference between the values or the motivators of that department and the rest of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So indeed, that it kind of attracted similar people from the other parts of the organization organically. So we have seen movements like that, and obviously we have seen a lot of cases where we do see a mismatch, and the person leaves due to that, or as a result of something we were able to predict after a certain period. Not that the person would themselves, become aware that they are maybe in the wrong place, but it's kind of quite often something very obvious that we were able to point out, months before the team finally broke apart.
Okay.
One story maybe I can share is that I looked at the management team of a well-known company, and it appeared that they didn't have, actually usually a good team has like 2-3 values in common, that what they both all think is important. But we saw a team where they actually didn't have anything in common except a wish to be independent. So, and that was amazing. When I saw it first, I didn't believe. I thought it's something wrong. When I started talking to them, it appeared that the CEO and the chairman of the board hadn't had a face-to-face meeting for 3 or 4 months already. And they said that, well, we don't need it. So actually, they didn't like to talk to each other. And they it took another month or two, and the CEO left, and it was quite predictable from this picture what we saw.
Very interesting. Very interesting to have a team where everyone wants to break away from.
Yeah, that team didn't work actually. They broke off entirely after a couple of months, so they didn't stop to exist. This organization actually dissolved.
On the positive side, did you see any predictions that you made, and then where you said, hey, these people would fit together? And did you get any feedback from the companies telling you actually it works and we have higher performance rates? Or how do you measure that to understand, hey, did we make the right choice? Is the algorithm working? Or is the theories, I know them as well, and they're good theories, they are tested theories, but is everything that we're doing working? Do we actually bring value to companies?
We do measure, yes, and we always look for whatever external data source or kind of outcome variable that we can measure. We always try to get our hands on as much data as we can. So the things that we measure as outcome variables are engagement, happiness, cohesiveness, satisfaction with communication, and so on. These are the things that we simply ask from team members, and there we do indeed see a very strong correlation between the measured engagement level and then the predicted, let's say, values alignment or different patterns that we are able to analyze based on the input variables. So yes, we do measure that, and wherever we are able to conduct a large scale case study and include a more objective variable like a performance rating or a performance score or maybe a monetary measure of performance, then always with our partner organizations we ask them for this feedback data in order to learn, look for new data patterns and increase the predictive validity of the assessment or the method that we rely on. Okay.
Good. Thanks for sharing. And now you know the podcast is called Skills for Mars, right? So skills for the future.
Oh,
and one of why I really wanted to have this chat with you is that my personal belief was that teams would be important in the future as much as they are right now. But there are questions, right? So if with this technology that's coming alive, and with all the movements, even in politics and everything that's happening around us, where the individual and even is becoming more and more powerful, and we talk about the heroes and we talk about all of these personas and characteristics of people, and we tend to become a bit more separate and look at ourselves more and maybe trust ourselves more and put ourselves out there more as individuals. Would teams be as important in the future as they are now, or would they become less and less important as we, develop technology and then we can become more autonomous and rely on technology rather than on other people? It's a more of a future thinking, more of a philosophical question rather than a Teamscope.
I believe they are getting more and more important. If you think of technology, of course, there is more and more technology coming up and developed, which says that, well, you don't need to meet people anymore. So that's actually, but it doesn't mean that teams are not going to be important, because if you have to work together, you still have teams. It's just maybe teams consist of people who are not in the same room each time. So, but there still will be teams. I'm quite sure in this.
Alo?
I agree that in the future, I'm very sure that teams and especially human interaction of any sort will become more relevant. If you think of AI and automation and all these buzzwords that are supposedly transforming how we work and live our lives, then they are having a larger effect in jobs, for example, where human interaction is not so relevant, and they have very little impact in jobs where human interaction is relevant. So the jobs that are being automated, taken over by AI or different automation tools, are jobs that were done individually or where human interaction was not so important. So the jobs that are left over are the ones where human interaction is the key, where it is relevant to work well with others, to understand other people, to do something in collaboration. So that's getting more and more important as we see, and I strongly believe.
And so would you say that the work you are doing, there's a difference between teams and communities, communities of practice, right? One is more task oriented, the other one is more knowledge sharing oriented, right? Do you think that there's a difference in which we should look at one versus another? Or if we look at values, personality, competencies, and through those we look at knowledge and trust and all of the others, this would be enough to build communities and not only teams?
I would believe there is quite similarity in this. Like people tend to form communities with people with whom they share something. So either it's a place of living or common values that might be or the professional communities based on common interests or something. But probably the same things are important. I would trust more people with whom I have similar values, and I would like to be with them. So I think community building and team building are in this sense quite similar. They are not the same, but the same mechanisms are probably in place there.
Okay. What's next for Teamscope? What are you planning next to do? Is there any kind of development you're planning? Are you just working now on what you've built and trying to get data in so you can build more on that? So what's next for Teamscope?
Yeah, I mean, we would hopefully we will never stop developing the product. We have already reached the stage where it is very good. People are happy. They get very clear value out of it, and we see very clear results based on what we measure and how we see candidates and teams performing after going through the assessment. But obviously, we are always improving, and every team that we analyze and work with gives us more data and more knowledge, more feedback that we are always using in order to learn new things, input new knowledge into the platform, and add more value to the next user. The big steps or the kind of big pieces that we're working on now is including, let's say, more of the frictionless assessment methods that are now popping up into the platform, meaning that if somebody wants to include or conduct a video interview and also ask the behavioral questions about values, personalities, attitudes, and competencies, then we are experimenting on how much we can gain valuable insight from doing that video interview, from analyzing the voice, from analyzing the facial expressions of a person. Again, not to substitute the human in the decision-making process, but to help them understand the candidate better and to help them be even more structured and data-driven when they finally meet the candidate and have a conversation around, what they aim to achieve together, what kind of environment they are joining, what kind of environment they need in order to perform well, and so on. So experimenting a lot with these frictionless assessment methods is on top of the list. And yes, indeed, we are working with larger and larger organizations, so the data that we are able to gather is increasing exponentially. So doing more and more of these experiments and custom analytics projects is also something that we dedicate a lot of resources on.
Oh, that's exciting. Maybe we can have another chat in half a year or a year to see what the new data that you've accumulated tells us about the teams and what makes or breaks a team.
Hopefully, yes. But indeed, like the long-term vision is the big goal is to help managers be better at hiring. And we do hope to see Teamscope as kind of a must-have thing in the hiring process at more complicated senior level roles where collaboration is key. We would like to see Teamscope as something that you should definitely use in that type of situation in maybe 3 to 5 years. So that's where we're going.
So where could someone find you? Where could HR leaders find you or hiring managers find you?
Yeah, it's teamscope.io. That's where we are virtually, and behind that virtual wall you will find the humans behind it as well. So that's where we are, and always happy to speak to new people who are curious to learn more about what we do, and we are always curious to learn more about the struggles of HR leaders and team leaders in general. So we always enjoy these conversations a lot, and even if somebody doesn't have a very specific use case in mind, then we would very gladly have a conversation to learn if we can do something together.
But geographically, maybe, Julia, I meant like we are in London and Tallinn, so our development team is in Tallinn, and we are on regular basis in London meeting clients and potential clients and partners.
I think I think you're traveling because I was talking to Alo the previous weeks, and then I think you're traveling quite a lot in Europe.
Every second or like one of us is usually in London, so it's like that's our policy, so that to be close there, available.
Perfect. Anyway, I will include a link to your website so people can find you more easier.
Thank you.
And then again, maybe at some point we can come back and see the developments that you can find, and I'll try to talk to John about you guys. See,
excellent.
Something interesting in there.
I hope there is reason to talk faster than in a year. So in half a year, definitely.
Just for the podcast. For the rest, definitely we can have other chats, and hopefully we will let me know when you're coming towards London or even Amsterdam, and then we can have a chat. Right. I always enjoy talking to you.
Good.
All of this nice theories and research. Anything that maybe I forgot to ask you and you would like to add? Maybe something I didn't think of.
I think we covered quite everything. So it's very good questions. So you know your field and what to ask.
Thank you, Tonis.
It was indeed, yes, and as I said, what I am always curious to learn more about, but I guess I have to wait for your next podcasts. Is I'm always curious to learn what other business leaders or HR leaders at the different types of organizations, what are the problems they are dealing with, how they're solving those. So that's the things that I always like to listen and learn more about. But I will wait for your other podcasts to become available.
Or maybe when we share this, we can ask this exact question, right? Share this and tell and ask, put a white question there. Hey, what are your problems with Teams? And then collect some answers.
Good idea. Absolutely.
Why not?
Very good idea.
We can do that as well.
Excellent.
And, Excellent. Cool. Thank you both so much, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Good luck with the funding. Good luck with everything that you do, and we'll keep in touch. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. Hope to see you soon.
See you soon.
It was an absolute pleasure. Bye bye.
Same here. Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.